It is once again time for my annual Steadman, Glazing, and meat riding extravaganza. Unfortunately, Season 4 of didn't give us enough of Cecil for me to be able to verbally fillet him. Still, it did give us some cool moments that reasserted for me, personally, that Cecil Steadman can do no wrong. I'm gonna pretend I didn't see that. But Cecil aside, this season did something I genuinely wasn't expecting. Surprisingly, it made Season 3 better in hindsight, because for the first time in a long time, Mark finally began to feel like a protagonist that I could actually root for. Back in Season 3, one of my biggest issues with Mark was that he was, well, kind of a little bitch, and that no one was really calling him out on it. In Season 4, Mark displays significant growth in the little bitch department, in a manner that positively reflects on his past behavior. But how can a new season's writing retroactively absolve the sins of a past season? Surprisingly, it all hinges on a key element of how Mark's writing as a character intersects with that of his father's, Nolan. Essentially, the evolving relationship between Mark and Nolan is one of the season's best parts, and from a writing perspective, holds the secrets to the season's success. Spoilers ahead. What we need to consider, crucially, is that Mark is a teenager. It's a fact that I had to constantly remind myself of whenever he fucked up. This is a young superhero who's still learning to go about life, who is beholden to impossible responsibilities. It can't be easy, and so we can forgive him the immaturity. My biggest issue in Season 3, however, was that no one ever called Mark out about his mistakes, not even in a guiding/mentoring capacity. Not Debbie, not Eve, not any of the Guardians. Everyone let him do as he pleased, except for Cecil. So while the naivete and capacity for error is an intentional part of Mark's writing in Season 3, as mentioned by Robert Kirkman in an interview after Season 3 had aired, I think the fact that no one addresses it is a weakness of the writing. I'm not going to say that Season 4 really changes that fact, but it does shift the approach to Mark overall. After the fight with Conquest and Eve getting hurt, Mark has fallen into a sort of superhero routine, fighting crime almost every moment of every day with Oliver. While in Season 3, Mark had been negligent of the world while he stayed by Eve's side in the hospital and had been disregarding of human casualties during his fight with Conquest, in Season 4 it seems he settled back into the reality of what it really means to be a hero and to have this huge power, the responsibility of it all. Mark cannot take a break, and he's harsh on Oliver for the same reason. Besides his total focus back on the job, Mark also begins considering things on a less naive, less idealistic level. This is primarily displayed through his angry outbursts against new villains and his struggle considering whether he should fully kill villains if the need arises. After having faulted Cecil for his extreme measures in the past, Mark is finally beginning to understand that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Drastic times call for drastic measures. He is maturing and realizing that the idealistic save everyone, kill no one hero method is not feasible in the real world. Notably, the world of Invincible already distinguishes itself from common Marvel and DC superhero media by making itself a little more grounded, more gritty, more violent, somewhat more realistic. Things carry weight. Heroes like Mark are constantly traumatized, people are hurt severely on the regular, and so on. And this is exactly why Mark's old world view was never sustainable in Invincible's universe. Mark is essentially finally maturing into a hero that can accommodate the darker nature of the Invincible setting, as opposed to an idealistic hero that would be better suited for the more lighthearted Marvel comic runs of the Golden Age. This show has always taken its time to show us the toll of the superhero lifestyle, how psychologically impactful it is on people. The past seasons showed Mark struggling with that plenty of times, albeit a little too much to the point where it became redundant to hear him trauma dump all the time. This season continues the habit of showing us that toll, but in a more subtle manner. Mark's commitment to just getting back to ceaseless work is alone a sign of the trauma he's dealing with. He's so afraid of people getting hurt again that he can't let himself rest. This is a point in particular that also fully culminates by his decision at the end of the season. When we look at Mark's behavior here and then consider the previous seasons, we start to see the growth more notably. Essentially, seeing all of these changes and pieces of character development in Mark contextualizes his behavior in the previous season. It really makes it feel like Mark has learned something from the failures of his past. That notion alone essentially is the show admitting that yes, Mark was screwing up in the past, but now a combination of growth, trauma, and wariness has caused him to take a different approach to things. In a way or another, it's an acknowledgement of him being kind of a little bitch in the past, which makes those past negative traits in Mark look more intentional than ever in hindsight. It's a natural growth trajectory of where his character was in season 3, which in a way kind of makes you appreciate the way he was written back then. The contrast that Mark's growth brings makes you look back at his anger, his chaos, and his ignorance in the past season and think, wow, he really has grown, thus giving the past season's Mark a clearer, more concrete reason for being written the way he was. But to me, I think the extent of Mark's character development truly shows itself when Nolan comes into play. I think the show's handling of Nolan's redemption arc is probably some of the best writing it has delivered yet. Redemption arcs for villains on the scale of Nolan are not easy, particularly in a show that takes itself seriously and gives way to the consequences of its own events. Nolan has essentially been changing ever since the conclusion of season 1. His maturity has been slow and eventful, and it isn't until we got here to season 4 that it's finally began to bear fruit. Firstly, the time that the show allots for this arc makes it feel all the more believable. It doesn't rush to change Nolan or get him on the good guy's side. Instead, it's a natural, almost realistic process of change over time. Nolan's actions in season 1 are catastrophic, not just to the people of the world, but to us as viewers as well. Seeing him murder innocents by the thousands, pummel our protagonist, his own son, into a bloody pulp, call his wife a pet, and so much more. These are things that are hard for us to forgive as viewers. Granted, we are more inclined to do so because we see him in somewhat of a good light throughout the first few episodes of the show, and then at some points in isolation. But it is still an uphill battle. By letting Nolan's redemption arc breathe, the show allows Mark the time to process things and allows us as viewers to have enough time that we can forget Nolan's actions slightly enough that we may begin to consider sympathizing with him again. But the other thing that the show does right in regards to Nolan's redemption is the world's reaction to it. While many other shows or movies would be quick to forgive the former villain's horrendous actions, Invincible once again really lets us feel them. Though he is trying to make amends, and despite the fact that he is objectively a necessary asset in the war against Viltrum, everyone still has a hard time tolerating him, let alone forgiving him. And this was truly so refreshing to see. It was refreshing to see Debbie consistently going off on him, Mark to clearly have never forgiven him, and even Oliver to be confused by his presence. And the fact that Nolan just shuts up and takes his well-deserved abuse by these characters softens him up even further for us, lending credence to the notion that he really is changing. But the show makes it clear that nothing Nolan does is going to erase his past actions. Consequences. The world will remember, his family most of all. Circling back to Mark and how Nolan affects his character arc, Mark's reactions to Nolan throughout this season are also a big indicator of Mark's growth. On the one hand, Mark is mature enough as a hero that he sees the value of Nolan in the upcoming war, and so doesn't antagonize him or attack him or try to completely disregard him. He gives him a chance because he knows that he needs him. But at the same time, there's no doubt that Mark also gives him a chance because at the end of the day, Nolan is still his father, and it's hard to deal with such trauma when it comes to your own family. Despite that, Mark, just like everyone else, isn't quick to forgive him, even though somewhere in his heart it's clear that he would like to. Mark continues to maintain some sense of distance from him and is aware that Nolan's actions need to have consequences, regardless of how badly the emotional part of him as a son desires to forgive him. It shows us just how much Mark has evolved as far as emotional maturity. We can actually see the emotionally innocent side of Mark mirrored in Oliver. Oliver has grown up on stories of Nolan's ill actions, but he's never seen them for himself. He hasn't experienced them much. He knows he should hate him for what he's done, but when he actually shows up, Oliver kind of gets overpowered by the urge to just connect with his father. Sure, it takes him some time, but it's clear Oliver wants to have a father again. The fact that he hasn't experienced Nolan's horrors himself helps, but I think a large part of why he's readier to forgive than Mark is also simply the fact that he's younger, more emotionally immature, more needy. Looking at Mark and Oliver together, you get a more indicative sense of how much Mark has grown emotionally by seeing the difference between him and Oliver in handling Nolan's attempts at redemption. To me, Season 4 has been one of the best seasons yet, and a definitive upgrade over Season 3. And it is in large part thanks to these complex, focused pieces of character writing. There's a lot more to love about the season, but the evolution of Mark and his drastic change, especially relative to his behavior in the past season, is the main one for me. It's a rare instance of writing so good that it makes me more forgiving and more understanding of what I felt like was a very hard to tolerate Mark in Season 3. Anyways, please let me know how you felt about Season 4 in the comments below, what you think of Mark's growth, Nolan's redemption arc, how much you miss the GOAT, Cecil, so on and so forth. I really look forward to seeing all the opinions about this, especially after seeing the engagement on my last video about Invincible. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you soon. Goodbye.